Oh, what's up? It's Jimmy on from Glitchy Thumbs, and today I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. I'm just kidding. I have a bunch of new characters that I'm working on. If you want to see those characters and how I came up with the idea and the concept, you can head to the YouTube Shorts video that I have below or on my TikTok. But let's go to the video. So I start with a reference that I drew in Procreate. I saved it as a PNG and just dropped it into Blender as a guide so that I can have something to follow. Kind of randomly came up with these characters, and this one's going to be character 1.1. I added a cube and added a subdivision modifier on top, which makes the shape a little bit more smoother. I changed the viewport from 1 to 2, and you can see the shape is a more rounded square shape cube now, and it works pretty well for this character. It fits really nicely, and I'm just scaling it to fit the reference. And here I'm going to use the snake hook tool to kind of sculpt this tail portion. I believe I was looking for the opacity of the reference that I was using so that I can lower that so it's not as distracting, and because I get distracted easily when I'm working. So yeah, and here I'm cutting half of the mesh and just using a mirror modifier. That way you're just manipulating one side of the mesh and you don't have to do the other side. It just automatically mirrors that portion. And I'm using the snake hook tool, or the snake hook in the sculpting portion of Blender, to kind of move these vertexes and just get the shape correctly for the tail, which came out pretty nice. You can also use the grab tool. I don't know the difference between snake hook. I pretty much just use snake hook most of the time. It says pulls vertices along with the movement of the brush to create long snake-like forms, and I use it pretty much for a lot of. Here I added another cube for the antenna portion of the character. I mainly create different objects and join them together. It's just easier for me to visualize, I guess. And right here I added a subdivision modifier again on the cube, changed the viewport from 1 to 2 to get that more rounded shape, and that creates that circular sphere type shape. I cut half of the mesh and added a mirror modifier so I can just do half the work of moving the vertices of the mesh around. Yeah, for the antenna, I'm just sculpting the sphere using the snake hook tool, and it allows you to just grab the vertices and just shape it to your reference, which I'm doing here. I mainly switch between snake hook and grab. I haven't really looked much at the other options. Those are the two I pretty much use. And you can adjust the size using F on the keyboard. And I'm just shaping it with the reference here. And it's coming in along pretty nicely. Yeah, and once I finish with both of those separate objects, I kind of just join them together. I don't know if this is the correct way of creating, 3D models. I'm pretty sure it's not, but that's what I've learned so far in my 3D modeling journey. And most likely I will improve upon, my skills as time goes on. And so far, the mesh looks correct and matches the reference that I had in Blender, and I think it came out awesome. It looks exactly dead on, and that's all you would pretty much need. I was planning not to include this part since I ended up not using these planes later on for the eyes, the mouth, and the arm. But since I already have the content, I might as well just, put it in the video just in case people find it useful. But I added a plane, which is kind of like a flat square shape that you can add in Blender. And then I used the shrink wrap modifier, which kind of like puts the plane right over your 3D model and kind of shrink wraps it to that shape. And pretty much I didn't use it later on in the process because I guess I didn't want to draw on it. I was going to use shapes instead. After you finish kind of like blocking out and sculpting your 3D model, you have to unwrap the UV map, which is the flat representation of the 3D model, which will be used for textures later on. This process is a little bit confusing when you're starting out because you're not really sure how to organize everything. You kind of find the similar shapes and put them together and then organize them kind of like Tetris, just so you're saving space for your textures, which is for, if you're making a game, it's going to be like the colors that you use for, in this case, this 3D model. And for me, I tried the project from view, which gives you just the front view of the character, which you saw earlier. But that didn't really give me all the pieces. And that's why I went with cube projection for this one. I'm trying to find the most simplest way to unwrap the character. And so far, that's what I stumbled upon. And I'm sure there's going to be a better way to do it as I progress. And yeah. I couldn't figure out why the UV maps wasn't showing for the planes. It was only showing for my 3D model, so that's the little portion right here. For the planes and their UV maps, the reason why it wasn't showing on the screen is because I didn't have the UV sync selection selected, and that's why it didn't show up. And after you do that, you can just press U to unwrap the different planes. In this case, there's one for the eyes, one for the mouth, and one for the arm. And I think later on I don't use it. And I was correct because from my memory, since these are old recordings, the characters that I've worked on, the reason why I didn't use the planes is because I would need to continue to draw over them versus just using shapes like I do here. Like I've added the sphere for the eyes because it's going to be easier to texture paint by just selecting the faces on each new object instead of actually just drawing it by hand to fill in the color. For the mouth, I added a plane and went into edit mode and collapsed all the vertex available into one and added a mirror modifier, a skin modifier, and a subdivision modifier, which gives you this circular sphere shape that you can manipulate with different vertexes. This is how I got the shape of the mouth, because you kind of need that curve. And that was the best process that I found that was useful. And I believe I removed the mirror modifier so that we can just manipulate one vertex. And then once you apply that modifier, you get this nice smiley face shape that I used for the mouth. To attach the mouth to the body of the character, I added a shrink wrap modifier. You have to select all the vertices that you want to connect to your mesh before doing that, which is what I did here. And then you assign it to a vertex group. And once you do that, the shrink wrap wraps pretty nicely over the 3D model. And here I'm just renaming all the objects to get a little organized. I add a cube and add a subdivision modifier and change the viewport to 2. Gives us that nice cube, circular-ish shape, rounded cube, let's just say. And you're able to make cuts with Control R, and that gives you a little bit more rounder shape. And I use that to make the arm, and that's it. Since we added new objects for the eyes, the mouth, and the arm, we have to also UV unwrap those as well. And here I just kind of added a material for all of the objects. They all share a material, and they're using one texture file. And here I had to cut or mark the seams for the eyes in order to unwrap them to get the nice circular UV map. And then I stacked the front of the 3 eyes together. That way later on we can paint the pupil on top, and then the back portion of the eye I stacked with each other. And that's why you see 2 separate UV maps, one for the front of the eye and one for the back. And for the mouth, I think I just did a cube projection to get that shape. And for the arm, I also marked the seams with the edges, something simple, to just get a simple UV map that we can paint over later on, and then just organize the new UV maps with our original body UV maps. And then just add the same material to all the new objects, the eyes, the mouth, the arm. When I compare the 3D model to the concept, it's actually pretty dead on. I think I did a pretty good job with this. Here you can see the reason why I decided to go with shapes. It's because it's easier to texture paint in Blender, because you just select the different faces on each object and then just fill in the color that you want. Here I chose black, or a lighter black you can say, for the pupil of the eye. And I adjusted the eye after because it's easier to follow everything if everything has a straight line, I guess, and the edges. I probably should have aligned the UV map as well in this portion, but I kind of forgot, and I was trying to fix the pupil with the hard edges, but I wasn't too sure because I selected the faces in the middle, the circular faces, and I just filled it with black, and it was still coming out with the rough edges. I wasn't too sure why, but later on I kind of figure out the issue. And you can see that if I fill the top of the eye, it doesn't align with the object, so the colors are kind of like placed off to another area because I didn't originally line everything. And it just makes more sense to actually align the object first and then also align it in the UV map so that it looks exactly the same and you know exactly where the colors are going to be for your character. At least for me, it just makes more sense that way. Otherwise, you have 2 different things you kind of have to worry about in case you have to like recolor it. For the pupil, I guess my first thought was to fix the edges by just kind of, you know, painting each pixel on the texture in the UV map. but you know, that wasn't really a good solution. So the next best thing that I thought was maybe to just increase the size of the brush and just paint a big circular shape. I think that just kind of fills in the eyes a little bit better. It just looks more like a pupil if you do it this way. So that's another solution, just by painting directly into the UV map portion with the texture instead of selecting each face and filling in the color. For the arm, I'm just selecting all the faces that I want to color, and I'm using half of the arm because I just want to fill it with a darker color to give the arm some, I guess, ambient occlusion. Should actually be on the bottom, but I actually did some on the top. But it just gives a, you know, that shading portion to the character, so it doesn't look like super flat with just one color. And I've been practicing with, you know, a little bit of shading, but I haven't figured out a good solution for 3D models just yet. As I was filling in the color, I was pressing Control Z just to undo a lot of times, and I realized that the texture file wasn't saved, so that's why I ended up with a black texture file again. So remember to save your textures, otherwise you have to redo everything, which is what I was doing here, and I had to recolor everything again because I lost the texture because it wasn't saved. For the rest of the body, I select certain faces like the bottom portion to add the ambient occlusion, which is just shadows on the character, and also I add the shadows on the eyeballs and also under the mouth, and it just looks better overall looking at the character because you have the lighter color gray and then you have the darker color to give it the shading it needs. And since I stacked the UV maps on top of each other, I had to separate the back portion, which is why you saw the shading on the back of the character, because there's two UV stacked on top of each other and I was shading both of them. So I split the two, and now you have two different UV, one for the back and one for the front. Once that's done, you pretty much have a texture painted character on your 3D model. Next thing to do is just to save the texture file and also export the character in FBX. Before doing anything else, I just think it's better to test your 3D model first before you add like animations or anything to your character. This is what I'm doing here. I just dropped the FBX into Buildbox, which is the game engine that I'm going to be using to build the game mechanics for these characters. I noticed that the low poly kind of design wasn't fitting, but I wanted to see how it would look if I just shaded smooth, which is what I did in Blender, and then just export another FBX. And I really liked this better, and I just turned off the receive shadow in Buildbox so that, you know, it doesn't mess up with the shadows that I added, and it looks pretty good. This is just the 3D model of character 1.1 Ghost. You can say that's the name I possibly might give it. On the 3D model, you can see the texture is wrapped around the character, and it's based on how we cut our UVs. So in the texture, if there's any black, that will show up where the cuts are. So that's why I filled in the black with the solid gray color. That way we have a more smoother texture around our character instead of actually showing where we made our cuts in the UVs on the UV map. And you can also just polish a lot of the pixels in Photoshop So if you have like extra dots anywhere that you feel shouldn't be there, or you just need to fix certain things, you can do that in Photoshop as well. It's a little easier just to fix things. And then just export the new texture and rename it, which is what I did here, and added it into Buildbox to test it. And just to make sure, the one thing that was inefficient was having to change the texture file for all my objects, since I had separate objects such as the eyes, the body, the mouth, and the arm. I had to change the texture for each one of them, and this wasn't as efficient as I thought. The best thing to do is to actually join those objects so that you can just have one object and one texture. The reason I started with gray for my characters and just like a darker tone, because it's just easier to focus on the character itself first before thinking about colors, because color is subjective. Right here I'm adding blue for character 1.1, but it can also be like red, or it could also be orange, and you don't really know what the color of the character is going to be at this point. At least for me, it's too early in the process to actually know the colors for your character, because you can always change that later on. So here I'm testing things. I'm using the blue color, and I use a darker blue for the shading. That way we can test in Buildbox to see how that looks. And now since we have this blue color, we can actually just change the hue, and that will change the color to any color that we want to test out. And right now it's purple because we changed the hue. We could change the hue to teal, green, just anything on the bar, and it pretty much captures all the colors. And I don't know at this stage what color the character is going to be. I could potentially have multiple ghost characters with different colors, and you can just unlock them. So that's an option. Who knows? In order to animate this character through this mesh and this 3D model that we created, we have to rig it, which is essentially just creating a skeleton that we're going to manipulate for each movement. Start off adding a armature, and you select a single bone, and within that you can delete that bone, but there's options on the right under Rigify samples that you can select. They have specific names for it. So there's like a spine, there's a tail, there's a head, there's like legs. So those are like the basic bones that you can add and try to create a skeleton for your mesh. And you kind of have to be creative with it. And this is a way to create different skeletons for different characters that you have. You have to kind of imagine or visualize, okay, what bones do I need that I'll need to animate later on? And that's just how my thought process was for this. For Ghosts, which is character 1.1, the bones that I added were a spine, a head, an arm, a tail, and a tentacle for his antenna portion on his head. And then I believe for the eyes, I added a basic super copy for all three. So there's 3 of them. And I added 2 hip bones, which were pretty much basic super copies as well. And I believe those were the only bones that I added. Once you organize the bones to your liking, and it's up to you how the mesh is gonna turn out. To me, it doesn't really matter. So far, you can always reiterate and just keep testing if you need to, but just kind of place the bones as you see fit, whatever works for your character, and then just test it by correctly parenting all the bones from child to parent. So an example would be the arm would be parented to the spine, and then the head would be parented to the spine, because the head is a child of the spine, or at least that's how I thought of it. And then the antenna portion would be parented to the head. Other than that, you pretty much have a rig, or you can call this a meta rig first, because we're going to create the actual rig after we set everything up. After having the meta rig, we would just hit generate rig, and it will create the final rig, which we'll be using for animation. And the final rig makes it a little bit easier to manipulate, because you have actual shapes that you can move, and that's a little bit easier to visualize and select and move around. To parent the rig, you would just select your mesh and then shift select the rig, and then press Control P and select with automatic weights. For the eyes, you have to keep the objects separate. That way you can manipulate the eyes based on your rig, and you would have to parent it to the bone after you've already did the automatic weights selection. Once we have the rig that we like, what we would need to do is organize all of our bones together by groups, and Rigify has this option for you to do this. It's called Rigify layer names and groups. We would move these bones to their own layer so it doesn't get confusing. We will give each row a name. So there's a head tweak, there's a spine main, there's a spine FK, and there's a spine tweak, etc. Each bone is given a different row, so it's a little bit better to visualize. And we would color code them based on value in the Rigify bone groups. A 2 is for the IK, 3 is for special, 4 is for tweak, 5 is for FK. And we would use this to separate the coloring between each bone shape. That way we can visualize, okay, this color belongs to this bone. And with that, we pretty much use these different shapes to animate our character. So each of these shapes is essentially the bone you created in your meta rig, and you can move them around, you can rotate it, you can scale it to create the animation that you want for your character. Yeah. Man, I'm tired. Been recording so much. The way I animate this character is essentially just hiding all the bones that I don't want to see, and just focusing on specific body part. For this would be the spine, and I would just grab something and move it and see what type of movement I see in the 3D model. And if I like it, that's what I would record. And that's how you kind of create the animation. You record each frame with a specific movement, and it will capture that location or rotation. And that's how the animation is created. So each frame, I did it by 10. I would move it just slightly, just to see what would happen. And then I would record that movement. And you can do that by pressing that record button, and it would just record everything that you did. Or you can also press I and then select location or rotation. There's other options too, but those are the main ones that I use. And you kind of just eyeball it, whatever you visualize for your character. If you want like a nice bouncing, in this case I'm working on the idle animation, like what does an idle animation look to me, which is, okay, the character is just kind of in place, bouncing a little bit. And that's pretty much what I did. And you can just duplicate the frames that you like to create a very longer frame. Yeah, a lot of this is trial and error. It's pretty much subjective. This is my character, and how I visualize it in my game is going to be how it turns out. So if you want something simple, you keep it simple. If you want something complex, you spend a lot more time. And for me, I like simple, because I know I'm going to have to work on more characters or more things, and you don't have to do too much in the beginning. Just do something that's understandable, that makes sense for your character and for the game that you plan to make. So to simplify everything, I kind of just joined all the objects into one and just created one body. And then to create a cool outline for the character, I duplicated the body and renamed it outline, and added a vertex group called outline, added a mask modifier and a solidify modifier. You need to add a second material for the outline and you change it from principled BDSF or whatever it's called to emission, and change it to black or whatever color you want to use. And those are some of the things that you can do to create a nice outline for it. To export the FBX after you're done, you would just select File, Export, select check selected objects, select the mesh, armature, change the forward to Z forward, and then uncheck add leaf bones and uncheck NLA strips, and then just rename your file and then export that FBX to test it. Once I have my FBX file, I just open a Buildbox, drop it in there just to test it out. And I forgot that since I've joined all the objects, I was missing the mouth, and I wanted to keep the mouth black. So I went into Photoshop, opened the texture, and the area that's the darker gray, I just filled in the black because now it's part of the body, and I wanted to simplify everything. And then you go into the scene by clicking edit and adjusting the outline to black from white, and that's how you can see the outline and test it out. For the rest of the scene, I'm just adjusting the background, the floor, just so it looks a little bit better in terms of representation, so I can visualize this for the character. This would be like a basic test for Ghost, just to see how he would look in game, but not so much in terms of the environment just yet. I just need some simple shapes just to get an idea of how this character will look, and I think it turned out really well. It looks exactly like my concept, and a simple idle animation that I added gives it some movement, gives me an idea of how I would want to possibly take this character in a future game. I'm not too sure what I'm planning to doing with this character just yet. Haven't really thought about the game mechanic or the environment. That's why I'm just setting it up in a way that I will remember in the future. So I would save this like possibly as a video, and then if I do return to this character, I'll at least have some sort of example of, okay, he looks like he can possibly be in a platformer game. Maybe I'll work in a platformer game with this guy, but who knows? That's the thought process. And since I already have this character facing the left side, I thought, okay, if we're going to really make a game with this character, we might as well adjust the direction as well. So it's a good idea to have the character facing the right side, because most games go from left to right. So you might as well have that character ready in case you do work on the game. And that's pretty much what I was doing here. I rotated everything and had to move all the objects to accommodate that side. And then since my UVs on the UV map were faced the opposite side, I had to adjust the colors or the shape to match the colors. And you kind of have to redo everything. And this is how I did it. I just kind of recolored everything in Blender and made those extra ambient occlusion shadows in the correct places. I had to redo the outline. Pretty much redoing everything that I did before, but because he's faced the opposite direction, you kind of have to redo that. Back in Buildbox, I'm just resetting up the environment that I did before. I tend to start from a new file most of the time, just because it allows me to remember things easier, because I'm doing that process twice. So the next time I'm setting up a scene, I'm actually doing it from experience instead of from a saved file, which is already completed. So I just do everything multiple times until my brain kind of learns that process. And once it learns that process, it will find a better, efficient way to do it next time. And that's just how I do most of my setting up for pretty much everything, and how I improve upon my own processes because I become more efficient as I progress. Yeah, and I'm pretty much brain dead now. I've been recording for a pretty long time, but you guys get the whole gist of it. And hopefully this all made sense, and Ghost looks very interesting to me right now. Alright, that pretty much sums it up for Ghost. Hopefully I'll make a game from this character. Who knows? I have a bunch of new characters coming out that, we're gonna be taking a look at. But please like and subscribe, leave a comment, whatever y'all want to do. Support the video, support the channel, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. And you guys are gonna love the new characters. Peace.